G'day everyone, Dikko here with another kick-ass walkthrough. This is episode 3 of a multi-part series covering texturing stylized characters. Today we are going to go through the process of baking in our characters' base colors, and for that we're going to use what I consider to be one of Blender's most underdeveloped systems, its texture baking system. And anyone who is familiar with the baking process in Blender will understand how much of a pain in the ass it really is to pull off properly. So yeah, a few words of warning. Yes, it is difficult. Yes, you'll probably fuck it up. And yes, even I fuck it up every single time. There's just so many stages in which human error can play a part here. And there's no real automated way to do texture baking in Blender, which is a real shame. But knowing how development is going with this software, I won't be surprised if this video is out of date in the next 12 months. Here's hoping at least that someone contributes some code that makes our life a little bit easier. Alright, you might be wondering why my node setup here looks a little bit different from the previous video. And the truth is, it's just me experimenting with the material setup to get a result that I like. So you don't have to follow me here exactly. You can do whatever you like to get the result you want from your basic blocking of colors. And you may be wondering, what's that green box there? It's actually just a frame node to help you organize things. So you can actually just access that with Shift A, go down to the layout section and choose frame. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is prepare this model for texture baking with UDIMs in mind. And while Blender does support UDIMs out of the box, it does not support baking multiple UV tiles or UDIMs simultaneously as a UV tile set. So firstly, we need to find a workaround to this problem, and to say it's annoying is an understatement. What we're going to do is create multiple UV sets and then realign the UV maps for each tile onto the first tile of our multiple UV tiles here, i.e. tile 1001. And then eventually we're going to assign each of these UV sets to a bake output texture. And for those who watched the previous video, yes, I did change my UV layout, don't you worry. It's just for my model. If you have a different layout, that's okay too. And by the way, if you only have one UV tile and aren't using UDIMs, you can skip ahead to the baking section of this video. Okay, let's get started. So basically what we need to do is go to your mesh properties on the side panel there, and we're going to create a duplicate of this UV map here. So just by pushing the plus icon, it will create a duplicate of that UV map. So go ahead and rename those as UVMap.1001, UVMap.1002, and so on and so forth until you reach the total number of UV tiles that you need to bake. So in my case, I need to bake 3 UV tiles, so I'm going to have 3 UV maps. So starting with 1002, we're going to shift our UV tile, so make sure you have UV tile 1002 selected, and then in the UV editor with everything selected, shift the UV tiles by selecting G, X, -1. And then again with the third tile, I'm going to select G, X, -2 to shift my UV islands across to the first UV tile. So what you should end up with is multiple UV maps where each UV tile has been shifted to UV tile 1001. See how I'm saying that Blender's baking system is a little bit shitty? Well, baby, we're just getting started. And don't be surprised if you screw up that little process. Just make sure that you have the appropriate UV map selected when you're shifting your UV islands. Okay, now it's time to prepare our material node to be able to bake out our textures. Because in Blender, to be able to bake out your material, you have to have it done through the material itself. Otherwise, Blender doesn't know which material it's going to be baking out onto a texture. Okay, so start off by creating a UV map node for each UV tile. Okay, now create an image texture node for each corresponding UV tile, and then hook those up appropriately. So now we need to tell Blender which UV map we want to use for our bake. So we're going to choose our appropriate UV maps for each UV map node. So let me explain what's going on here. UV map 1001 is going to output to one image file. 102 will output to another image file. And 1003 will output to a third image file. So now create an image file for each node. So just make a new one by pushing new. and give it the appropriate file name for your project. So in my case, I'm just going to go with base bake 1001, 1002, 1003 respectively. Okay, so once you've done that, Blender doesn't actually save those image files onto your computer, so you have to do that manually. So first thing we are going to do before we start baking is save those images into an appropriate texture folder. In my case, I have a folder called bakes, and I'm going to put them in there. Alright, next thing we need to do is set up cycles for baking. So I want to set the sample size to something low for now. 16 will be good enough because I want to be able to test very quickly. So if I make any mistakes, I won't be waiting half an hour for a bake to finish. And you could set it to just basic path tracing as well. And once you're successful with your baking and you want to do a higher sample rate, go ahead and do that. Okay, in the render properties panel, we're going to scroll down to the bake tab and select the diffuse option. And for this bake, I'm going to keep everything selected, so direct, indirect, and color, because I want to get in that ambient occlusion color that only comes from the direct and indirect light contribution. And I'm going to split my properties panel into two so I can look at both settings at the same time. So I want to be able to switch my UV selection and also set up my bake settings at the same time at a glance so I don't get lost. Okay, so let's bake in map 1001 by selecting our 1001 UV map. And we need to select it because we need to tell Blender which UV map we're going to be baking with. And you might think that the little camera means it's selected, but it's actually not. The highlighted selection means it's been selected, and the camera means it's referencing that UV map as the projection for the bake. I know it's confusing. Okay, so if you have a single core GPU or rendering off the CPU, in the render settings, make sure you set your render tile settings to the size of your texture resolution. So if you have a 2K texture, you set the tile size to 2K, so 2048 by 2048. I have two GPUs, so I just split it to 512 by 512 because I want to get the power out of those GPUs. Okay, we're ready to finally start baking, but one thing we need to do before we start is in the material node editor to make sure you select your appropriate UV map. So in this case, I'm going to choose 1001 and the appropriate texture node to bake to. So again, to reiterate, to bake an appropriate texture, you want to have your appropriate UV map selected in the side panel, and you want to have your texture node output to be selected in the material editor. Okay, so once you've done that, you can press bake. Yay! And hopefully everything goes okay. It processes that bake, starts rendering it in the background, and eventually it should pop up in your image editor as a completed bake. And there we have it, our first bake. And as you can see, it's only rendered out that one UV tile, so we have to go through and do it again for everything else. And this is the part where you can start to inspect how the bake went, whether you like the colors or not, etc. So in my case, I might change the skin color of this character a little bit before I do the final bake for the rest of the body. Because as it stands right now, it looks a little bit too saturated and a little bit too red. And that's why baking at a low sample rate is really important at the start. Okay, so once you've done any appropriate changes, you can do a rebake and wait for the process to finish again and see the result. And I'm a lot happier with that color palette. Also, make sure that your color management settings is set to standard with a look of none. Okay, so now we can do the rest of the so-called UDIM tiles. So we need to go through each selection and then bake individually, which is going to be a bit of a pain in the ass. This is where human error really takes its toll, so really make sure you're selecting the appropriate textures and the appropriate outputs. Okay, so I'm rebaking this first tile, making sure that the color management is applied, and that looks good. So now it's time to save that image as a diffuse pass. So before I move on, I'm going to save that image as my diffuse. Push OK. Now it's time to select the second lot of exports and make sure I have selected the 1002 UV map as well. Notice how I haven't changed the little camera to UV002 as well. And of course push bake and let that run through. And once that's rendered out, you'll be able to see that because we've selected the appropriate UV map and the appropriate export file, that we're going to have the bake occur on the right file with the correct UV map. Save that file and then repeat the process again for any subsequent UV maps that you need to bake. So again, I'm selecting the final UV map, I push bake and let that run through. And there we have it, we have our final diffuse pass. So make sure you've saved all of those diffuse passes because now it's time to bake in the normal maps. And if you've done any multi-res sculpts, this is super important because it'll bake in all that multi-res detail into your normal map. Okay, so before we start baking our normal maps, we need to create some new image files to bake to. So we're going to create a new texture for every output slot. So you can see here, I'm going to push a new file and then name that as bake underscore NRM to equal normal. Push OK and repeat the process for the rest of the nodes. And again, same process as before, make sure you save those normal maps as a new file. We haven't baked them yet, but save them anyway. Okay, now it's time to bake those normals. So same process as before, start from the top, make sure things are selected appropriately. And the normal map will bake a lot faster than the diffuse, by the way. And you can see from the multi-res, we're getting all that detail from the sculpt into that normal map, which will be really important for the continuation of our texturing process in the future. So again, be really careful with how you're saving your images and what you're selecting when you're baking. Because again, it's really easy to save over a diffuse pass by accident. It's really easy to bake the wrong UV map. It's really easy to do all of those sort of mistakes. Really fucking annoying, but that's just the only way you can do it with Blender. So we can only hope to God that some magic genius who knows how to code will actually integrate a new form of texture baking for Blender and contributes it for free. Who knows? Anything's possible. So once we've done with that, you can see we've actually got our final bakes up and running. We can actually link these up in our material editor now and replace our procedural texture bake. But before we do that, I want to talk about plugins. This is where you spend money to make your life easier. And a lot of people will frustratingly say, oh, I'll just wait for them to update the software. Surely they'll fix this. And the answer is you don't know that they're going to fix this or not. It may be next month, it may be in 2 years. But you're better off saving your soul now and avoiding so much frustration by buying a plugin to make your life easier, especially when it comes to baking in Blender. Trust me. So I may as well give you a recommendation as to what baking plugin we should use here. And there are a ton of them out there, but in terms of simplicity and its integration with Blender's internal baking system, I find that this app or this plugin called Simplebake does the best job, especially when it comes to baking the normal maps from a multi-resolution sculpt. And like always, because it's still using Blender's overall system to do this work, it doesn't support UDIM baking, but because we've already done the UV mapping, so we've already done this, obviously, we've already done our maps from earlier in this video, we can still use these UV maps in the plugin to help make our lives easier. So, as an example, let's bake in our textures from scratch using this plugin. So the cool thing is the Simplebake plugin is available inside the render tab settings, and all you gotta do is expand the window here, and then without any other work, you just have to select your model, nothing else. You just have to select the diffuse, in this case the subsurface scattering. So I've actually brought back my SSS vertex paint layer into my principal shader, and I can also bake out a normal. But notice how I can bake out a bunch of other stuff as well. So I can break out transmission, specular, you name it. And the other cool thing is that you have an option to automatically bake out the texture size. So it's automatically going to generate the texture size, bake the image, and do all that shit that we have to spend, ages doing before. It's going to do it all for you automatically. Apart from that, you can also name your file. So in this case, I'm going to go with basebake 1001 as my my file name extension, and I'm going to have UV map 1001 selected. So with all that stuff sorted out, all I gotta do now, without even touching the material nodes or anything like that, all I gotta do is push bake PBR maps and let it do its thing. So you have to be in object mode to do it. So once you've done that, just select the object that you want to bake, push bake PBR textures, and give it a few seconds. And it actually bakes faster than the internal Blender system as well, which is even cooler. And it does it very efficiently too. So that's done. Notice how it automatically creates a folder name as well. So in this case, it's called Simplebake Bakes. There you go. And if we go to our folder here, look at that. Perfect bake out of the door, no worries. And it's done all three without me having to go into the node editor, add the extra UV maps, do all that other fucking shit that we just talked about. And I saved myself a shitload of time. And not only that, the actual quality of the render is really, really good out of the door. Perfect for what I need. Now, check it out. All I gotta do now is to bake out my next set of UV maps. UV map 1.002, I just select the UV map that I want to bake. I make sure that I rename the batch name to 1002. Push bake PBR maps again. Let it do its thing. And it will generate those textured maps, and we're good to go. There it goes. You can see it generated there. We go to our maps. Look at that. Perfect. 1, 2, 3. Done. And again, one more to go. Name the file. 03. Bake PBR. Boom. So there we go, all done. So in a matter of minutes, rather than in a matter of hours perhaps in some cases, we've managed to bake out all of our maps that we need for our base texturing for the next video. And you might be asking, why the hell did he spend all that time talking about how to do it in Blender Standard? Well, firstly, you need to understand how the actual system works, okay, before you can actually use these plugins. You still have to do the UV map setup. You still have to sort of understand how the baking system works in Blender to be able to effectively use the plugin. But the point is, once you understand that, you can get the plugin and save yourself fuckloads of time. Okay, so this plugin I think costs about $10 on Blender Market. I'll give you the link in the description. But just think about how much time you just saved by doing this, by spending that a little bit of money, a tiny bit of money, lunch money, on something like this to make your life easier. And until Blender actually supports UDIM baking, it's probably the best method to go with. And you should think about your sanity here and how you will feel trying to deal with Blender's baking system. Emotionally and mentally, you will feel a lot better with a plugin to do all of that stuff for you. So $10 for peace of mind is pretty damn good value, if I say so myself. Okay, so now we've baked in our textures, I've actually turned on the multi-res to get even more detail into the bake. So you can see here, so as you can see here, I've actually baked in all the wrinkles and stuff, which is really cool. with that Simplebake. So again, because it's so easy to bake with that plugin, I can be iterative. I can turn on things, turn off things, and do that sort of stuff. So I baked in that into our diffuse, and also baked it into the normal. So that's going to be really important going forward. So now that we've done that, I'm going to copy all this stuff into my texture setup here. I'm going to put it into the appropriate folder. So I'm just going to paste it into there and replace what's already there. And now it's time to assign those textures to a material, which will be then linked to this character. So I'm going to turn off my multi-res now, so I don't need it for now. Make sure it's turned off as a rendered object as well. And I need to save this material as a fake user in case I want to go back to this thing and rebake. So I'm going to make it a fake user. So that means if I close Blender and reopen it, I won't lose this material. And I'm going to remove it as an assigned material for this character. So turning on my preview here, I'm just going to remove it so it's nothing there, and I'm going to make a new material. And let's rename this material as MAT Bossman Texture, and we'll leave it at that. Okay, so with that in mind, let's center on that material there. And I'm going to relink those textures, or link in those textures that we just baked into our material here. So I'm going to go to texture, image texture, and I'm going to push open. And I'm going to go to my texture folder, push O for bakes in my case, and notice how in the side panel here, there's an option to detect the UDIMs, which means it's going to detect the 1, 0, 0, 1, 2, and 3 as being part of a singular texture sequence. So it's going to join those together as a texture node. So I'm just going to select my diffuse for now, push open image. And now if I link that in to my base color, check that out. How cool is that? So straight out of the bat, we're getting all that detail from our procedural setup from our original material. Even the wrinkles are coming into our low poly mesh here. So even better is if we bring in our normal. So if we bring in our normal now, select the normal. It's already detecting the UDIM tiles, just so you know. Switch it to non-color. And I'm going to link that up with a normal map node. Like so, into our normal input of our material here, and check that out. All of that high res detail from my multi-res and all of that ambient occlusion and all that fancy shit that we did in the previous video is now baked into the texture. And if I move this light around, you can see it's actually reflecting appropriately, just like the multi-res was. And if I bring back a, say, subdivision surface modifier and turn on my bevel that I have assigned to this thing, I basically have the same level of fidelity into my character texture here without the performance hit I'd get from my multi-res. How cool is that? The wrinkles are coming in, the wrinkles in the cheek there that aren't actually modeled into my material, into my model there, are there. The stretching of the chest, the slight musculature and rib cage stuff that I added there, the folds of the fat, all is in there. It's all been baked into my normal map here. So check this out. So here it is here. So let's have a look in my texture setup here, in my image set editor. Let's have a look. You can see it's all there. It's all been linked up as you'd expect as a tiled texture. How cool is that? Same goes with my normal map. It's all there, linked up appropriately, perfect. And from here on in, we can start to flesh out this texture even more as a paint layer, basically. So in the next video, we're going to go into detail about how to add even more detail to this body texture using our node setup here. And we're going to use a sort of non-destructive texturing method to get even more character out of this texture here. And that will be sort of similar to how we do it in Substance Painter, but using a Blender-centric workflow. So until then, catches and try to have fun with this baking bullshit. See ya.